Those who are Christians believe that God created human beings. If you are a Christian, you are, by necessity, a creationist. You believe that we were wonderfully and carefully designed and that the entire creative process was miraculously and supernaturally generated and guided by God. So do we now have an insurmountable impasse when it comes to creation versus something like evolution? I once heard a joke about a little boy who goes to his dad and asks, "Dad, where did human beings come from?" And his father says, "Well, we descended from apes." And the little boy then goes to his mom and asks, "Mom, where did human beings come from?" And she says, "We were created by God in God's image." And the boy says, "But Dad said we descended from apes." She says, "Well, I was talking about my side of the family." But back to the impasse. First, the Bible doesn't say how God created, only that he created. And it talks about the creation of human beings in a very literary, poetic way, using phrases like "from the dust of the earth" and "receiving the breath of life," which doesn't exactly sound like it's trying to be a biology text, does it? Evolution is one of the leading theories in science for the how we were created. You may be surprised to hear me say I think that's fine for those who are open to God. You may also be surprised to learn that according to a study released by the Pew Research Center, this is where most Christians land. The majority of Christians agree that human evolution is real and that God had a hand in it. Pew acknowledged that perhaps in the past they had been asking the question regarding evolution wrong, meaning not phrasing it in a way to allow both the embrace of evolution along with a role for God. If God used evolution as part of his creative process, so be it. That doesn't mean there wasn't an original Adam and Eve who God breathed an actual soul into at the end of the process to mark the beginning of how the human race as we know it began, much less God guiding the entire process. But does the theory of evolution itself point toward a God or away from one? Well, let's begin by thinking about the timeline. While the age of the universe is around 13.8 billion years, the age of Earth is about 4.5 billion years, but life didn't exist 4.5 billion years ago. It couldn't. That was a geologically violent time. There was constant bombardment from meteorites. Earth itself had to cool, its surface solidify to a crust. Life on Earth, the latest thinking goes, began about 3.8 billion years ago in the form of single-celled prokaryotic cells, such as bacteria. Multicellular life didn't come into play until more than 1 billion years later. It's only in the last 570 million years that the kind of life forms that we're familiar with even began to evolve, starting with arthropods, followed by fish 530 million years ago, then land plants 470 million years ago, and then forests 385 million years ago. Mammals didn't evolve until just 200 million years ago, and our own species, Homo sapiens, only 200,000 years ago, according to theorists. So humans have been around for a mere 0.004% of the Earth's history. That's the evolutionary time frame. That's also the evolutionary problem if you don't have a God involved. The whole idea behind naturalistic evolution is that it's a product of time plus chance. But there just hasn't been enough time for Earth to cool and life to be produced naturalistically by chance. Sir Fred Hoyle, who was a former Plumian professor of astronomy and experimental philosophy at Cambridge University, determined that if you computed the time required to get all 200,000 amino acids for one human cell to come together by chance, it would be about 293.5 times the estimated age of Earth. Even further, Hoyle, along with his colleague, calculated the odds for all the functional proteins necessary for a one-cell animal to form in one place by random events. They came up with a figure of 1 chance in 10 to the 40,000th power. That's the number 1 with 40,000 zeros after it. Well, so since there are only about 10 to the 80th power atoms in the entire universe, Hoyle concluded that this was an outrageously small probability that could not be faced even if the whole universe consisted of organic soup. For the current proposed evolutionary timeline to work outside of divine intervention, it would be like having the working dynamics of the latest iPhone, along with the entire corporate campus of Apple that produced it, to be instantly created by chance through a single explosion in a computer geek's garage. If you're going to embrace the theory of evolution, you also need to seemingly embrace some kind of outside, guiding, enhancing force that sped it along, directed it strategically in the time frame of the age of Earth. Now, even if you assume there was enough time, or perhaps you want to buy into the theory that mutations and evolutionary leaps can fill all those time gaps that we pointed out, you still have the problem of the initial complexity of life. Now, I hope this isn't all too much science, but for some of you, it's precisely science that matters, so let's keep going. Darwin himself noted that if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, he said his theory would absolutely break down. Well, biochemist Michael Behe speaks of Darwin's self-challenge in terms of a mousetrap. The common mousetrap includes a platform, a hammer, a catch, a spring, and a holding bar. And each component is required for the mousetrap to function as a mousetrap. I mean, you can't start with a wooden base and catch a few mice, add a bar, catch a few more, functionally evolve step by Darwinian step into the most effective mousetrap, one that has a base, hammer, spring, catch, and holding bar. There has to be a minimum number of interacting parts that are assembled to allow the catching of mice before the trap can even begin developing into more advanced levels of mice catching. This is what it means to be irreducibly complex, to be a system that consists of several interacting parts that must be in place to function as that system. Darwinian evolution depends upon there being a minimal function in place from which the more advanced functions could evolve. But as an irreducibly complex system, our mousetrap could not have been produced by continuously improving an initial function of mouse trapping, by slight successive modifications of the mouse trapping process. Take away any of the 5 parts, no mice would be caught. The conclusion is that the mousetrap was somehow made as an intact system. Could not have just evolved into that system. It had to have been designed as a system for that purpose. Now, if that logic applies to a mousetrap, how much more then does the human body, with all of its intricacies and wonders, imply there must have been a creator?